with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am your host, Scott Allen, and this is Phronesis, Practical Wisdom for Leaders. If the topic is leadership, I'm in. I've spent more than 20 years in the field teaching, learning, writing, and questioning. When I'm not working on Phronesis, I travel, delivering keynotes, working with individuals and teams, and helping people from organizations across industries become better leaders. Want to learn more? Visit me at scottjallen.net. Phronesis offers a smart, fast-paced discussion about all things leadership. We explore relevant topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. Listen Notes lists Phronesis in the top 3% of podcasts worldwide. Phronesis is the official podcast of the International Leadership Association. ILA brings together those who teach, study, and develop leadership, advancing leadership knowledge and practice for a better world. Learn more at ila-net.org. Finally, if you enjoy Phronesis, please subscribe to stay current on our weekly episodes. If you find an episode that resonates, please share it with your colleagues and friends. And if you want more content, subscribe to my newsletter, The Leader's Edge. The link is in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. And now, here's today's show.
Okay, everybody, welcome to the Phronesis podcast. Thank you so much for checking in wherever you are in the world. Today, I have two guests. The three of us have never met before, so I am excited for this conversation. I'm excited to learn today. I have Dennis McCunney, and he is the Director of Intercultural Affairs at East Carolina University. And I also have Carla Ortega Santori. She is the Strategic Initiatives Manager at the Door Institute for New Leaders at Rice University. And they have been on an adventure, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that leadership adventure in our time together today. But I was saying before we started, I've never done this before. You're going to introduce yourselves today. So Carla, maybe share a little bit more about you with maybe a fun fact in there somehow, and what do listeners need to know?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Carla Ortega Santori, but Carla is just fine for today. I have been at the Door Institute for around 4 or 5 years, and I've really enjoyed my time there, thinking about how to elevate the leadership capacity of Rice students and also elevating leader development as a whole in higher education. My background is in IO psychology. Way back when I did my dissertation, I studied the passion for work. So that was a great exploration. In recent years, I've been focusing more on leader development. I am a mom of a 2.5-year-old who's obsessed with Thriller, the Michael Jackson song. He loves zombies and skeletons. So Halloween is coming up. Great timing. He's loving the decorations, and we're expecting baby number 2. I work from Puerto Rico, which is my home. And a fun fact about me, I don't know, I guess something really weird is that I hate ketchup. I deeply dislike it. I just can't.
I just can't.
Yeah, my son will never know ketchup coming from me. I will never offer it to him, but if someone else does, then I'll deal with it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And Thriller, that's so much fun. I remember the days, gosh, it might have been like 1984, 1985. I'm 51. So we would wait for Thriller to show on MTV live because, you couldn't stream it. You just had to wait it was like 7 p.m. on Friday night, Thriller would show. And oh my gosh, it was a Friday night. It was a whole Friday night.
It's every day for me now. I listen to the song. I watch him dance it. I watch the YouTube. It's everywhere. We've seen all the versions of Thriller, Monkey, Lego, kids, everything.
That's awesome. Oh, and Dennis, why don't you introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. And Carla, it's great that you're keeping the 80s alive with your son, right? So proud of that. Hey, everyone, it's Scott. Thanks again for having us. Dennis McCunney. I'm at East Carolina University in Intercultural Affairs, also work with student success initiatives here on campus. I've been here since 2012, so in my 12th year here. Also teach in our College of Education and Leadership Studies program. So I have a lot on my plate, lots of great stuff. My background started in campus ministry and then Jesuit higher education, and then slowly got more involved in experiential education and community engagement, leadership education work. And then the past couple of years have helped to oversee a number of leadership academies here at ECU that work with community members and senior leaders, faculty, staff, and students, as well as our military population to help them transition from military style leadership to civilian leadership. So I love what I do. It's great opportunity. Feels like a vocation and not so much work most days. And fun fact, I fancy myself as a bit of a runner, not really a fast runner, but I'm doing a 210-mile relay race in the Blue Ridge Mountains in a couple weeks with some friends called the Blue Ridge Relay. And so we'll be exploring that area and suffering a little bit through the night, but we end up at a brewery in Asheville, North Carolina. So I'm excited about that challenge and the inspiration and suffering and maybe leadership lessons that I'll be thinking about at 2 a.m. in the middle of nowhere during that adventure.
Oh, well, good luck. I love that part of the country. We've spent a little bit of time in Boone, North Carolina, or Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Just beautiful area, the Blue Ridge Mountains. So you'll have an incredible view as you suffer through. That kind of rhymed. That was pretty good. So Dennis, we're here because of you. And maybe we start with you quickly. You had said, hey, I have a suggestion for an episode. And I wrote you back right away. I mean, even before we got on live, I told you that I just love this project, the podcast, because it's really systematized my learning. And what we're going to discuss today, I don't know a whole bunch about. So I know that listeners will be interested in knowing more as well. So Dennis, you're the impetus. So why don't you bring listeners into kind of what you were thinking when you suggested this topic?
Sure. Yeah, I've tried to, follow the topics on your podcast for quite a while now and have, really been inspired by the folks you've profiled and thought, there's this huge effort that Carla has been at the helm of for the past couple of years now through the Carnegie Foundation and Rice University to help universities enhance their leader development on campus and make it more systematic, recognize their resources, which has materialized into this new classification through the American Council on Education and the Carnegie Foundation as a way to help campuses be more rigorous in their own self-study of what it means to be an institution committed to leadership for public purpose. Not what we say here at ECU, we have a strong service mission, and we're not trying to develop leaders who are only interested in their own career development, only interested in personal success, only interested in their own advancement, but are trying to be leaders for the public good, leaders who are making a difference in their communities. So we thought we would maybe talk about this topic because, it seems like it's been really a helpful way for campuses, especially I'll speak for my own campus, ECU, for us to build on this narrative. Like we are training leaders to make the world a better place in broad strokes. And thankful to the Carnegie Foundation and the leadership of Carla and her team to be able to help put that into action. And it's been a great boost for our institution now that we received word that we are a classified institution back in June. So it's been a great opportunity for us to build on that legacy of leadership here on campus and keep telling the story that we think is a strong one.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited for this conversation. I had General Kalditz on the podcast, maybe a year and a half ago, and he had kind of started talking about maybe some of this. It might have even been a couple years ago, talked about this a little bit. But Carla, maybe bring us back and tell us the story. And then Dennis, I know that you've gone through the process, so maybe we can go to you to kind of talk a little bit about the classification process that you went through. And congratulations on being awarded that in June. That's awesome. So Carla, tell us the story. Take us back.
Of course. So one thing that we learned at Rice is that, and at the Doerr Institute specifically, we have a measurement team or a research and evaluation team, as we have rebranded recently. But Dr. Ryan Brown, who is our social psychologist, has done a lot of studies and research at Rice and how we are developing our students as leaders and stuff. But one of the main findings and one of the most surprising findings, I think, was that undergraduate students did not become effective leaders simply because they attain their degrees, right? Like going through these 4 years of a great undergraduate education does not inherently develop them as leaders. They don't develop leadership skills. They don't spontaneously think, wow, I'm a great leader now that I have this degree.
Yet every institution basically says we develop leaders in their mission and vision, correct?
More than 800 universities and colleges say that in the United States. There's a study by, I think it's Austin, and I forget the reference, but there has been a study done on how many universities say that. So what we found is that students need to engage in opportunities that are designed to develop leadership skills and knowledge, right? Intentionally develop those. And like you said, universities will claim they develop their leaders, but they have no way of knowing if they do it because a graduation rate is just not an accurate measurement of that. So that's where the rigorous part that Dennis was talking about comes in. We're thinking about at the Door Institute, how could we think about and measure this commitment, sort of? How can we make sure that folks are considering this and really implementing evidence-based practices? How are others measuring this? Because we were curious about how to measure it ourselves, which is where the Carnegie elective classification for leadership for public purpose came in. And that's a mouthful. But it's this great framework that the Carnegie Foundation came up with, an optional, right, self-study that a college or university will go through, where they will examine their mission, their communications, policies, practices, curricular and co-curricular activities, to look at how it is that they are developing leaders, how they're developing leadership abilities in their students, their faculty, and their staff. And like Dennis said, this process is meant to help institutions improve and celebrate their efforts to develop leaders. So while there are a number of sections and a lot of evidence they have to provide in order to prove this commitment, right? Let us know that they are investing in this and working towards all these things. There is room for some continuous improvements to identify areas where they still don't have a plan or have implemented something, but are planning on addressing it in some way. The classification is awarded by the Carnegie Foundation, but it is managed by the American Council on Education. They oversee the day-to-day operations. And then us at the Door Institute, we're like the Sherpas for the classification, right? Like the day-to-day administrators. And that's how we work together to bring this classification to life. Conversations around this started back in 2020, where we came together with a bunch of scholars and practitioners to lay out the application and what this could look like. And it's evolved into us launching the first site goal in 2022. Institutions submitted their applications. They went through a really tough process. So I can't underscore how much effort, Dennis has gone through to get this application in and all the hard work that has paid off. So congratulations are certainly in order, and it's a big accomplishment. But yeah, that's how it's grown and evolved. And we're prepping for the next cycle that's supposed to launch in January 2025. It's when applications will be coming out, and we will welcome a new set of institutions that are applying for this classification.
Great. Well, Dennis, I do see a little bit of gray in your beard. So talk about the process. Talk about how you got involved, how you got engaged, and maybe paint a little bit of a picture for listeners about, and even maybe what you learned through the process. I think that'd be a lot of fun too, but let's get some insights there.
Yeah, and maybe some of that gray, both from Carnegie and my children. But we'll say Carnegie for today. Battle scars. As Carla was talking, I was thinking about a couple summers ago when we decided to undergo or go through this process. Our previous chancellor, who had been teaching in our honors college for a while, really dedicated to leadership education and written several books on leadership within public higher ed in particular, came to some of our leadership team and said, we could really apply for this and this could really be beneficial. And, as senior leaders, right, they want to see the prize, the award for the effort. But ultimately, like what we found is, this 1.5-year process of assembling a team, of coming up with our working orders, our timeline, and saying, how do we gather all this evidence that the classification is asking of us? How do we tell a kind of a narrative that makes sense, right? To make sure it all flows. At the risk of sounding, maybe a little bit crunchy, the journey is the destination in these processes, because what we learned along the way is that we think we have a compelling story. It's never really been packaged, and we've never actually gathered the evidence. And then we also have never really identified the gaps, because at a large institution, about 29,000 students with all sorts of complexities, there's never really been a systematic way of saying, okay, so, our College of Business does this project particularly well and infuses leadership in their curriculum in this way in their MBA program. And our College of Nursing does it this way, and our leadership studies minor, and so on and so forth. But then how do we kind of bring it all together, and what are the unifying things that link all those efforts together? And so now we're at a place where, we have a team that started at about 20 people and then slowly grew to 35 people around the campus who are contributing to this application. And that team has been empowered to say, how do we build on this momentum to continue to look for new opportunities that we may not have been aware of before doing this application, new opportunities for scholarship or new collaborative opportunities that kind of exist here. And so that's kind of been exciting to say, like, okay, yes, this makes for a good press release. This makes for some good discussion at our board of trustees meeting. Absolutely, right? Our alums are excited about this, but now, how do we build on this to keep it going?
Well, I think it sounds like you discovered probably even some synergies through the process by getting those people in the same room. I imagine that just even some of those conversations were impactful. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. I mean, because I think that we wouldn't necessarily have had those conversations, right? For example, like, how many of our courses have some sort of leadership learning outcomes? We don't have a systematic way to actually examine that. And so we brought in our IR folks, our institutional research folks, and said, is there a way to identify this? And there wasn't an easy way at first, but we examined the data that we did have in all our different systems across campus. And it was incredible to see how many courses actually had leadership learning outcomes and how they were being measured. We just weren't really collecting that information systematically. And so that was like a moment of, wow, we can really build on this, which was exciting to see.
For sure. Carla, so what have you seen as you're kind of looking at this from a 40,000 foot perspective and interfacing with some of these individuals like Dennis, I imagine all over the world? What have you noticed? What are some things that have kind of stood out for you in this process?
It's been amazing to review all these applications. I was able to personally read through all the applications that came in for this 2024 cycle. So I was able to spot some trends and themes that reappeared throughout the cohort. And what Dennis is mentioning rang true for, I think, so many campuses. When they were able to assemble this team to put together an application, it, first of all, forced folks to sit around and come up with a common definition of how are we defining leadership education or leadership development or leadership for public purpose? How are we, approaching this? What is the framework that we're using to develop our students? What are the concepts that are common throughout? And looking at it in so many different parts of campus. So courses, like Dennis was talking about, was a big thing. Like folks were, emailing deans to see, does this fit, do you have courses that fit this description? This is how we're defining, leadership courses. Does this fit with any of the courses that appear in your department? And I think a lot of folks are planning for and moving towards defining what a leadership course is, even taking steps to designate them or track them throughout campus to understand the depth and breadth of curricular activities, right, throughout the campus, to understand how it's impacting students, how it's showing up even in transcripts, et cetera. The same could be said for co-curriculars or extracurriculars, all the activities that are happening. That I got so many questions, I think, in all of our Q&A sessions and just emails back and forth with folks who were trying to define, what should we include here? Do we consider just every co-curricular because they have a, leadership structure? So there are leaders in each co-curricular, does that count? And I was like, it's a really tough question. You need to define what you think is a leadership co-curricular, right? Like, what does classify as something that develops students' abilities to be more effective leaders? Another big thing that we noticed was, and I think the section that folks most commonly struggled with, was defining or itemizing what a budget for leadership for public purpose looks like and defining that. And it's really hard to understand where it resides, where it doesn't reside, how we're investing money into it, because there's no itemized list of things, normally, because there's not a campus-wide approach to it, usually, right? The other sections that were tougher to address were the assessment sections. So understanding how where your campus is measuring impact, outcomes. Yes. At an individual, programmatic, and institutional level. All those levels were really hard for folks to understand, or not understand, but to grasp how they were doing it, because so many things are being done on campus. So many great things are being done on campuses. So many great things are not being measured. When we want to go back to, boards of trustees or your president or your provost and say, this is really working. Okay, how do you know that? Well, this is the evidence that we have. This is why we need to invest more money, or we need more leadership centers, or we need vice president of leader development at our campus, right, to oversee everything. So that was interesting. And a lot of folks are making concrete plans to address these issues. They're coming up with mechanisms to measure and track. Some folks already have some mechanisms in place that are just being revamped or looked at more closely now because of the classification process. So yeah, it was really exciting to see, and a lot of visibility, I think, for folks in leadership centers or all this great work. So more visibility with their leaders at their, institutions to be able to see and recognize this great work and have that seal, right, of the leadership for public purpose classification is great.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I imagine that, Dennis, throughout this process of kind of getting these groups of people together, wrestling with some of these questions, is there a part of the application that really stood out for you as a major insight or learning that, as you reflect on the experience, you just say, wow, it was this section that really just helped us as an institution leap forward in how we're thinking about our work? Does something come to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the questions that talks about campus culture and context, I think it's question number 2, and it really kind of gets at, how are you aligned? How are your leadership activities and initiatives aligned with your funding, your mission, your organization, et cetera? And that was really inspiring to read that. I personally didn't write that question, but team that did write that question, I think did a great job of actually saying, that we are actually aligned with the historic roots of our institution. And we've been trying to build on this idea of being a leadership university. Our former chancellor calls it, we used to refer to us as the leadership university. And we would say, well, how do we prove that we are the leadership university, right? Like that's sort of the upper echelon or the pinnacle of leadership, right? But I think this helped us to gather that evidence and to say that we do have a compelling case for that tagline. I was talking with our current chancellor a couple of weeks ago at an event, and he said that he'll occasionally toss out some tidbits of some university news to our board of trustees to keep them in the loop and various other stakeholders. He said, he mentioned this new classification and shared our press release that we put together, and he said he hasn't gotten that much energy and enthusiasm back from some of those stakeholders in a long time. And it was sort of unexpected, right? But it goes to show that it's building some excitement, especially around a time when higher ed is being critiqued more than ever, to say, how are graduates making a difference in our local communities? And this helps universities to make that case. And I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about applied learning. And I think that that particular part of the application helped us to tell that story. Yes, we are actually making a difference. And yes, our institutional story is important. Our presence is important for all sorts of reasons. And we're only trying to kind of build on that history.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, Carla, How do people learn more about this process? What are some resources that you can point people toward as we begin to wind down our time together? How do people learn more? And do you have any suggestions for success?
Ooh, suggestions for success. I think the very first thing you need is to put together a great team that includes stakeholders across campus, right? Anyone and everyone that is doing something leadership related, leader development, leadership education needs to be included. And once you're done, inviting everyone, think about who's not at the table and who needs to be, because sometimes things aren't defined as leadership, but it is adjacent, or they're just talking about it in a different way. So consider who needs to be included in this team to first, make the decision to apply and then to put together the application, because gathering data, analyzing it is a really tough job, and it requires perspectives from everyone on campus.
Great.
So that is my number one tip for success. Where can you go for resources? First of all, we have this free platform called HigherLed, and you can join for free. And there you will be able to see and look through anything classification related. So you'll have resources, webinar recordings, frameworks, guides, etc. You can also email me. You can visit our website at the Door Institute or the ACE website. I'm sure we'll have those listed here. But yeah, I'm always happy to hop on a Zoom or phone call to talk more about the classification. It is like 90% of my job. So I'm really happy to talk about it anytime. So those are the best ways to learn more.
That's great. Well, I always close out our conversations by saying, what's caught your attention in recent times, what you've been listening to, streaming, watching, other than Michael Jackson's Thriller. Although I'm sure there's some leadership lessons in Thriller, but what's caught your attention? It could have to do with what we've just discussed in leadership, but it could be something totally not related. Dennis, let's start with you. What's caught your attention in recent times?
Oh, great question. My latest book that I'm reading is Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. And maybe that kind of goes back to my upcoming relay experience in the mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains. But, to keep it consistent, there are definitely some leadership lessons when it comes to trying to push ourselves to do some challenging things, right? Or as some people say, do hard things. And I'm just getting started with the book, but I think it's inspiring to think about just how we experience discomfort and how that pushes us to be on a learning edge, which is a good thing. So I'm going to stick with that book, and hopefully it'll push me to continue to do hard things.
Awesome. Comfort Crisis. Yeah. It reminds me of, just by your description, Vygotsky, the zone of proximal development, right? We're not too comfortable, but we're not too challenged, but we're in that Goldilocks zone of growth and development. Carla, how about you?
Well, like I said, Thriller, a lot of toddler songs. So Baby Shark, etc. is on my playlist, fortunately. But I guess recently what I watched that isn't Thriller related was the latest season of The Boys. Have you seen that on Prime Video? It deserves all the trigger warnings because it is gory and offensive and for mature audiences. I'll say that.
Okay.
But it does explore, I think, this idea of who it is we give power to, who we put in power, who we admire for all the wrong reasons. So that dilemma of, who we put there as a figure, as a leader, and who deserves to be a leader. And yeah, so that was an interesting watch.
Superheroes, correct? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Superheroes that are not great. They're not great people. They're not great leaders. So it was a very interesting take, I think, on superheroes.
Well, I will look for it. Now you've intrigued me. And my wife and I were just saying last night, hey, we need to find a show. So now you've intrigued me. And so mine will be, and I wrote a blog post about this the other day, but I don't know if the two of you have watched The Bear, the season 3.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Gosh. Oh,
yeah.
A lot of lessons there in leadership and influence and organizational change. And an IO psychologist could have a heyday.
It is not psychologically safe. I would venture to guess.
My 16-year-old had been watching that. I said, please tell me you're not repeating the language that you're hearing in that.
Yes.
Just all I ask. That's all I
All the
ask.
warnings there as well. Yeah, all the warnings there as well.
Yeah.
Well, to the two of you, thank you so much for stopping by today. I really, really appreciate it. Thanks for the incredible work that you're doing. Congratulations to you, Dennis, not only on the certification and the classification, but on the upcoming race that you will participate in. That's just awesome. Enjoy that. And Carla, congratulations to you on baby number 2. Very, very excited for you. And thanks for the good work that you do for leadership education, leadership learning. It's pretty incredible. And for listeners, there are a bunch of links in the show notes. So check those out, learn more. And of course, as Carla said, reach out to her. I am confident Dennis would also field questions for those of you who are interested in learning more from a user perspective and an applicant perspective. So to the two of you, maybe I'll see you in Chicago at the ILA. I hope to do so.
I know that many of you, like me, are intrigued by what you just heard. I think the practical wisdom for me is that if you are singing from the mountaintop that you develop leaders, or it's in your promotional materials, how do you show that? How do you provide evidence? How do you at least move the needle in your institution to truly do what you say you're doing? And I think some places are really, really working hard in that endeavor. Others, maybe leadership is just kind of a tagline. It's sexy. It sounds good. It's a word like entrepreneurship or innovation. It just sells. So what are we selling? And are we authentic in what we're selling? As always, thank you so much for checking in. Thank you for your engagement. And if you like what we're doing, please share it with others. As always, take care. Be well. You have just finished another episode of Practical Wisdom for Leaders with Scott Allen. To contact me, visit scottjallen.net or send me a note at scott@scottjallen.net. I'm also on LinkedIn, so let's connect. If you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. And now here's my daughter, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.